every year, I'd take my family up to Ohio to visit with our relatives. My wife and I both grew up in Ohio, and we've lived there for most of our lives, but I was forced to move for work in Arizona. We've always made it a priority to visit family between the busyness of our daily lives, at least once or twice a year. Last fall, I booked a flight to Ohio as usual. We plan to stay for a week, and we prefer to rent out our own place when we go, so we usually look for anything that looks decent and cheap on Airbnb. Having an energetic 5-year-old son and a 7-year-old daughter, we've learned that staying at my parents' house is not a good idea. My wife and I found a nice 2-story house about 10 minutes away from my parents, so we booked it and officially planned the trip. Our flight landed on a Saturday evening, and we rented out a car for the week. The drive to the Airbnb was only about 20 minutes, and by the time we pulled in the driveway, we were all pretty exhausted. The house was in great condition, and we were pleased to see that everything looked clean and orderly. It wasn't much of a trouble putting the kids to bed that night, since they each had their own room on the second floor and wanted to try out their beds. My wife and I watched some Netflix on the couch in the living room before we headed up and went to bed. For the next 3 days, we visited my parents on Sunday and Monday, then visited my wife's parents on Wednesday. Everything was going great until we were driving back home on Wednesday night. As soon as I pulled in the driveway, my wife and I instantly noticed that the front door was cracked open. We had exited through the front door, so we didn't instantly jump to the conclusion that someone broke in. With the kids running in and out of the house, and my wife and I making sure we had everything we were bringing over, there was definitely a chance that we accidentally forgot to lock it, or fully shut it for that matter. To be safe, I had my wife and kids wait in the car while I checked inside the house. I carry a pocket knife on me wherever I go, so I pulled it out as I scanned each room and flipped on all the lights in the house. After some searching, it was apparent that we were responsible for the door being left open, as everything in the house was exactly the way it was as we left it earlier in the day. I came back out and told my wife we were good, and we all went inside, ensuring that we locked the door behind us this time. It was getting late, but the kids weren't quite ready for bed yet, so we all hung out in the living room and watched some cartoons. Not too long after that, the kids were definitely settled down, so my wife took them upstairs and tucked them in their beds. Just like the previous days, my wife came back down and we watched Netflix before heading to bed shortly after. I fell asleep pretty quickly, only to be awakened by something that sent me flying out of bed. My daughter was screaming at the top of her lungs from her room, so I bolted out of our room and down the hallway. The door was wide open, and I could see the silhouette of someone crouched in the corner. What happened after I saw this is a total blur to me, but my wife was standing behind me and witnessed the whole thing. I charged at the person in the corner, who was a middle-aged man, and beat him until he was unconscious. My wife called the police, and several cop cars arrived outside the house shortly after. The man was instantly placed under arrest and taken away, and we spent the next several hours talking to the police. The man inside my daughter's room, like me, had a pocket knife on him. He was actually well known by the police because he was previously trespassed from the property after talking to another family's kid who was playing in the yard. He rightfully went to jail, but we were all left shaken up from the whole incident. We still don't know whether or not he was already inside the house when we returned home, and that makes the whole thing even more unsettling. Regardless, we didn't lock the front door earlier that day because there were no signs of it being picked, so we had no idea how long he'd been in the house. My daughter was obviously the most shaken up, but she's been able to start sleeping again without having nightmares all the time. As parents who love our kids, I don't think we really realize how we'd react in situations like this, because mine was out of pure rage, and I could have killed him if my wife didn't pull me off of him. It was an awful experience to live through, but I'm glad I was able to protect my daughter. For the past 6 years, I've been living in the boring state of Ohio. Being from Florida, I felt out of place for the first year or so, but now that I've made some good friends, I've adjusted. My family and I moved into a ranch-style house right around Monroe County, which I believe is one of the counties with the most rural area in the state. Literally almost everyone in this area is a farmer, but my parents aren't, so I'm not even sure why we moved here in the first place. Like I said before, I've made a few friends here, but they all live in town about 30 minutes away, so we don't hang out too often. I've never really been drawn to nature, but that's about the only thing surrounding us here, so I like to say that I familiarized myself. Near our house, there's a lot of farmland, woods, and hiking trails, so I've spent a fair amount of time hiking around and exploring the area. One summer afternoon, I got let out of work earlier than usual, so I decided to go for a hike. There was a hiking trail that I'd be passing on my way home, so I pulled over on the side of the road to park when I got there. The trail was located right off of a pretty desolate country road, where I'd maybe pass a total of 2 cars. I wish I had checked the weather, because once I was pretty deep into my hike, the skies opened up in a torrential downpour. Within minutes, I was completely drenched, so I didn't even bother running back to my car. Once I finally made it out of the woods, I noticed something sitting on the windshield of my car. It was a note that read, "I accidentally hit your car." There was a phone number at the bottom of the paper, so I punched it into my phone and tried to assess the damage. As I walked around the car, I couldn't find any damage, but it was also pouring rain and pretty dark at this point. I got in my car and dialed the number. It rang the entire time, but no one answered, so I left a message. I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was somewhere along the lines of, "Where did you hit my car, and please call me back." Once I hung up, I started driving home. A few minutes later, I got a text notification from the number I had called. "Can you meet me by the spot where you were parked in 10 minutes? I decided to call my dad and let him know what was going on, since I'm still under his insurance. He told me to go drive there and he'd meet me, then went on a spiel of how I'm lucky that they're doing the right thing. I was about 5 minutes ahead of my dad to the spot, so I arrived there before he did. I parked in the same spot by the side of the road and waited, hoping I'd be out of there soon so I could finally go home and change into dry clothes. The roads didn't have any streetlights, so it was completely dark. As I sat in my car, the rain continued to pour relentlessly, creating an eerie atmosphere, especially being out there alone. The minutes ticked by, and I began to feel a growing sense of unease. I glanced at my phone, realizing that my dad should be arriving at any minute. Just as I was about to call my dad, I noticed a flickering light out of the corner of my eye in the woods. My heart pounded in my chest, and instinctively, I locked the car doors, watching it as it got closer. Whoever was carrying the flashlight was a short distance away, so I called my dad in a panic. He told me he was 30 seconds away, and I explained that someone was approaching my car from the woods. By now, the figure was within 20 yards of my car, and I could make out a hooded person walking towards me. I saw the headlights out of my dad's truck approaching, so I stayed put as I watched him pull up in front of me. As soon as the figure noticed this, they abruptly turned and took off running back into the woods, disappearing out of sight. My dad ran up to my car, not even noticing whoever was in the woods. I caught him up on everything that I just witnessed, and he was just as freaked out as me. We ended up having the number traced by the police, which turned out to be from a burner phone that was disconnected. The most unsettling part of this was that the call and text for the number was pinged between 2 cell towers, right in the middle of those woods. Thoughts from that night have raced through my head for weeks, and I still have no idea what that person was planning to do. My dad and I thoroughly checked my car for any damages the next day, but we couldn't even find the slightest scratch. We even asked a mechanic, who was a friend of my dad's, to inspect the internal parts of the car for any damage or signs of a crash, but he couldn't find anything either. I think it's safe to say that I was in serious danger that night, and I'm glad I called my dad. This incident occurred in either January or February of 2022. At the time, I had recently turned 21 and was living in Ohio with my father. To provide some context, my life was directionless, and I was incredibly naive. Having grown up in an affluent area of New York, I had attended private school and college, but I dropped out and was struggling with major depression. I was partying excessively, hanging out with the wrong crowd, and always finding myself in trouble. My mom, unsure of how to handle me, sent me to live with my father in Cleveland, Ohio. During my time in Ohio, I had been living a somewhat entitled teenage lifestyle. Apart from a job in retail, I didn't do much, and neither did my alcoholic father, who wasn't much help either. However, seeing him passed out in the living room one morning, coupled with being stuck in a dead-end job, made me yearn to return home to New York. Although my mom refused to let me live with her again, I reached out to my best friend at the time, whose mom was like family to me. Despite their limited financial means, they purchased a bus and train ticket for me to go back home, and they offered me a place to stay until I got back on my feet. It was a huge relief. While my dad was sad to see me go, he agreed to drop me off at the downtown bus station. However, he had to take me there before his work shift, which meant I would have to wait from 9 a.m. until we boarded the bus later in the afternoon. My dad was extremely nervous about leaving me there, emphasizing that the station was located in a rough part of Cleveland, and he cautioned me to be careful. I brushed off his concerns, totally oblivious to the potential dangers. My dad drove me to the Greyhound station, where people were gathered, waiting for their buses, and a few individuals loitered outside the entrance. It was a cold day. Inside the bus terminal, it was relatively empty. My dad helped me bring 2 large suitcases, containing all my belongings inside. Unfortunately, I couldn't leave them unattended, and had to pay to store them in a locker near the front desk. Being broke, I couldn't afford the fee. I glanced wearily at the clock while my dad looked at me with sadness, clearly worried about me traveling alone. We hugged, and I tried to project confidence. After saying our goodbyes, he left. I had traveled multiple times before, both by plane on my own and with groups to various countries. Adventure wasn't something I shied away from. What I lacked was the ability to read people accurately. I genuinely believed in the inherent goodness of everyone, and had never experienced anything negative, even during late-night encounters in downtown New York. New York's robust public transportation system had made me accustomed to encountering weirdos, drunk people, and heated exchanges between passengers on buses. In this particular situation, I felt comfortable since I had taken public transportation alone many times. Returning to the Greyhound station, I decided to go outside for a cigarette. Now, the challenge was keeping an eye on my 2 suitcases. I positioned them near the front desk in a way that allowed me to see them clearly from the entrance, where I then headed outside to satisfy my nicotine craving. I stood to the right of the front door, smoking and rummaging through my cheap and unattractive purse, which contained my passport, since I had irresponsibly lost my driver's license. As I searched through my purse, a man wearing a large knitted hat approached me and asked for a cigarette. I glanced at him and obliged, providing him with a cigarette and a light. We exchanged brief conversation, and I studied his face. He didn't really look creepy or menacing, although slightly disheveled. I couldn't determine if he was homeless. Nothing immediately raised red flags, and I felt secure as the area outside the terminal was populated with people, some smoking like me, and others briskly walking to their destinations. Notably, there was an older gentleman standing across from me on the left side of the entrance. While talking to the man in the hat, I noticed the older gentleman staring intently at me, as you'll soon understand why. The man in the hat inquired about my origin, if I was catching a bus, and commented on the cold weather. In passing, I casually mentioned that I was running low on cigarettes. He looked at me and suggested, "Oh, there's a gas station just around the corner. You can buy some there." If I'm being honest, I pondered the idea briefly. My bus wouldn't depart for hours, so I could easily purchase a pack and return in time. However, remembering my unattended luggage held me back. I told him I would consider it and turned to head back inside. Hours passed, and every so often, I would go outside to smoke. The man in the hat seemed to be there every time. At one point, he brought up the gas station again, insisting, "It's right there. I can take you." Once again, I declined, not out of fear, but concern for my belongings. I returned inside. During my final trip outside, the street was eerily quiet, devoid of people. I grabbed another cigarette and placed my purse on the ground beside my feet. As I looked up, the man in the hat appeared once more, asking for money. It was at this moment that my gut feeling finally shifted, and an uneasiness washed over me. I replied saying that I didn't have much and couldn't help him. Hurriedly finishing my cigarette, I became acutely aware that my purse was lying exposed next to me. I quickly leaned over to retrieve it, mumbling something about going back inside. As I straightened up, the man in the hat reached out, grabbed my purse, and said, "Let me help you with that." My body tensed, and I instinctively clutched my purse closer, responding, "I'm good." In that instant, the man in the hat transformed from a harmless stranger to a complete maniac. Through clenched teeth, he hissed at me to give him my purse. I could sense the suppressed anger in his voice. Desperate, I resisted, Realizing that no one was around to assist me, I started screaming for help. The man in the hat shoved me with his hip, pushing me against a wall, snarling at me to shut up. Panic gripped me as I realized that this man could easily produce a knife and harm me or deliver a punch. I clung to my purse, praying that its flimsy handles would hold. His hands pressed down on mine as he pushed me again, hurling insults. I screamed even louder. Suddenly, from my left, I heard a voice ask, "Are you okay?" Remember the old gentleman I mentioned earlier? He seemingly materialized out of nowhere and loudly inquired about the situation. With my left thigh, I forcefully shoved the man in the hat, and at that moment, he seemed to recognize that any harm he inflicted on me could easily be identified. He released my purse and fled. Shaking uncontrollably, I tearfully ran inside, leaving the older gentleman outside. I was too terrified to even utter a thank you. For the remainder of the day, I hovered by the front desk, consumed by fear. The thought of the 3-day journey that lay ahead filled me with dread. When the time came for me to board the bus to the train station, I glanced around in terror at the other passengers. I couldn't fathom sitting next to anyone. Every person became a potential threat in my mind. I slumped into a seat and cowered by the window. Then, I heard a voice behind me say, "I was going to warn you." Startled, I turned my head. It was the older gentleman, casually seated behind me. My eyes must have been wide as dinner plates. "I knew he was targeting you. You need to be more careful." Tearfully, I expressed my gratitude to him. He silently stared out the window, nodding in acknowledgement, and we didn't exchange any more words. That moment changed my life. I reflect on how insistent he was about me going to the gas station around the corner. The hairs on the back of my neck still stand up whenever I recall it. I'm not sure if he only would have just robbed me for the meager amount of money in my purse, because I would have been completely alone and helpless at that gas station.